I understand, Gerald, that you place a great emphasis on crypto and its developments in terms of decentralized global networks. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone on the panel is certainly a proponent of more decentralization and more user control, right? Taking power away from some of the centralized technology platforms that have dominated much of our social media and existence really in the last decades. I think Sygnum really stands for actually the promotion of responsible regulation to facilitate the adoption of crypto and tokenized assets more broadly on a global basis, right? I think Ken mentioned rightly the fact that when launched, many of these token assets can have a global reach because they piggyback on our existing internet infrastructure today. But the question about the application of the relevant securities regulations, investor protection mechanisms that various regulators have determined makes most sense for their jurisdictions, those need to be enforced and applied, certainly in a more diligent fashion than what we've seen in the early decade of crypto's emergence. Sygnum, as a fully regulated financial institution in two of the leading financial hubs in the world, I think our responsibility is to ensure that our clients, which number now over 1,000, we administer more than 2.5 billion of assets for these clients. I think we need to ensure that they can participate with complete trust and peace of mind without having to worry about, cybersecurity issues, but also more importantly, as importantly, about tripping up any regulation that they might or might not be aware of.
That's a really good point. And it also touches on, I think, what Scott, you mentioned earlier, these regulatory questions and enforcement hurdles that, often allow unscrupulous actors in this space to run unchecked and potentially create these issues of trust for many users. And so looking ahead to the future, and I'll direct this question to all of you, in the case that any one of you wants to answer first. What are the greatest challenges lying ahead in ensuring and in a way developing this trust and diligence? And how can we overcome them?
Well, I think from our perspective as a venture investor, I think to a certain degree, we kind of play a significant role in making sure that we're kind of funding founders that are value aligned and then kind of the long term of kind of the crypto ecosystem, right? So I think the problem here right now is oftentimes, unlike in the traditional Web2 companies or traditional companies where you have this long vesting period and exit opportunities that requires you to be fully aligned with the companies for say 4 to even 8 years and so on and so forth. With crypto companies, you oftentimes lack the kind of a buy-in due to early exit opportunities to tokens and of that, right? So I think venture investors have this really high responsibility of making sure if they're putting their money into a company, these founders are not only here for the short term for value extraction, but also just in general in it for the long run, right? So I often just look for founders who are just even sometimes founders who comes from traditional finance or big tech. Are these really people who is kind of who just joined this space 2 months ago after buying their first NFTs and only just want to get a lot of money and get out? Or are these people who are generally excited by the potential of the industry and wants to be around for the next 5, 6, or even 10 years, right? And so I think these are really kind of pretty easy to tell as a venture investors, just from seeing them respond to questions with regards to market stakeholders, or even seeing how their products are built, how they think about their customers, and how they think about the long-term sustainability of their product. And I think that's really kind of what's really important these days. And I think not only regulators should play an active role, but also investors and other market participants too.
I see. Ken, what would you say about this long-term sustainability? In order to overcome and in a way address these red flags?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what Scott has already said, but maybe to add on the point of educating the market. Obviously, because we are in the industry and we represent industry players, we do have that responsibility, and we carry the baton as industry players to educate people that we interface with. That crypto is the next wave and the largest intersection between tech and finance, and will expand both in exponentially. And I think it's really important to clarify a lot of misconceptions in the space. A lot of people who are newer to crypto, they get their sources of news from headline news, and which may or may not be represented correctly. To understand the space, to connect with the right people, and really to help reduce that friction as we get more and more wallets and people transitioning to Web3, also to Gerald's point. And I think the second part of the challenges would be on regulations, also harping on what Gerald has already mentioned. I think having a continued open dialogue with regulators is very important. As industry players, we tend to be, I guess, naturally at the forefront when it comes to some innovations or when it comes to certain trends. I think a two-way conversation with the regulator is very important for mass adoption. Singapore and the MAS obviously has done a very great job in not only the region, but globally positioning itself as a thoughtful leader, open to new ideas and flexible in policy making. And I think that's going to continue to be a focus for a lot of regulators in different jurisdictions around the world.
And Gerald, speaking to this two-way conversation with regulators, this specifically sort of references Sygnum Singapore's experience, or at least there's some resonance. How would you address this issue?
Yeah, no, I think what we have found is that regulators are more than welcoming of constructive dialogue that helps them to do the tough job of balancing the needs for introducing more financial innovation in their respective markets with the important role that they play with regards to investor protections. And it's a really fine balance to thread. So when we have engaged with our regulators in Switzerland, FINMA over there, or the MAS in Singapore, we've always found a very receptive audience. And I think some of these regulatory processes, the understanding, getting the regulators up to speed, do take time. The ones of us who are committed to the long-term game and to ensure that investors all over the world can participate in this asset class responsibly, I think we will see a lot more. I think as long as we keep our focus, keep our heads down, I think we will see a lot of progress in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Certainly, crypto as asset class now is clearly here to stay. And so usually, when at these panels, I like to issue a call to action for the listeners. Truly, it's everyone's responsibility to get informed and get involved, because it's a train that is certainly hurtling forward into the future at very high speed. And if you don't get involved in it, you will be left further and further behind.
Thank you, Gerald. And I think that segues very well into our first viewer question. Of course, to our dear audience, please feel free to add any questions in the Q&A box under this panel. We have an anonymous user asked, the decentralized and trustless elements of a token means that there is no single organization responsible when things go wrong, as I'm sure we're all aware. Are there any regulatory guarantee or insurance measures that protect users against intentional or non-intentional harms? Ken, would you like to take this?
Yeah, I think I can take a stab at it, and probably Scott will have a much deeper answer on it. I think, yes, you're right that DeFi and decentralized protocols have no central counterparty to take the blame, but at the same time, these new protocols are also run by a group of people, whether it be a DAO, whether it be a protocol team. And I think we have seen in some instances where regulators have retroactively reached out or reprimanded some of these earlier players, say back in 2017 or 2018, a few years down the line as they gather all the facts in place. So I think there is some misconception there. There are regulations in place today to take action where needed for these types of players. And maybe Scott, you want to add some stuff as well.
Yeah, I think I can kind of like on the follow on of that is that I think even if without the intervention of like regulatory agencies, I think like a lot of the players in the space, in DeFi space, almost always try to kind of like act in good faith in terms of like, in terms of kind of like helping make sure of solvency in the protocol in case of like, say, a hack or an exploit or like, say, any like issues with the protocol, since I think like a lot of them thinks that these space can grow even more in the long term, and just cutting it short right now would be a negative EV play for them. And on top of that, I think like we've started seeing kind of these like, uprising of like kind of insurance protocol on DeFi as well. So like companies like Cozy Finance, which I happen like, to be like a very good friend of the founder, Payong, is also like building like these like, the solutions to make sure that users have like some sort of protection in case of like a protocol failure or exploit or and so on and so forth. So like, yeah.
Thank you, Scott.